I was choking to death in the middle of a quarterly earnings meeting, and there was nothing wrong with my body. My throat closed first. Not like an allergy, not like a cough, like an invisible hand wrapping around my windpipe and squeezing, knuckle by knuckle, until the air simply stopped. I grabbed the edge of the conference table, tried to speak. Nothing. Not a whisper, not a rasp, just silence where my voice used to be. 9 colleagues staring at me, one of them asking a question I could see moving on his lips but could no longer hear. Then the pressure dropped into my chest. Imagine someone pouring wet concrete into your lungs, slowly, steadily, filling every pocket where air used to live. My vision shrank at the edges, as if the world were being seen through a tube that was collapsing from the outside in. I heard a chair scrape. A hand landed on my shoulder, and then nothing. 25 minutes. That's how long they told me I was gone. 25 minutes of gasping, unresponsive, unreachable, while paramedics ran every test they carried. Oxygen, normal. Heart rhythm, normal. Blood pressure, normal. Every single reading, clean. One paramedic looked at his instruments, then looked at me, and said a sentence that still follows me into every room I enter. "Mom, medically speaking, there is no reason this should have happened to you." But I knew the reason. I just didn't have the words yet. Because while my body was suffocating on the 14th floor of a building in one country, 5,000 miles away, on the other side of an ocean, my mother was taking her last breath in a hospital bed I didn't even know she was lying in. Same minute. Same 60 seconds on the clock. Confirmed later by the hospital. And what happened to me during those 25 minutes is the reason I can no longer live the way I lived before. But I need to tell you who I was first, because without that, you won't understand what was taken apart. I was an operations director, 20 years in multinational logistics. I built my entire career on a single rule. What cannot be measured cannot be trusted. I ran my department that way. I ran my relationships that way. My colleagues called me surgically precise. I took it as the highest compliment a person could receive. My mother lived 5,000 miles and an 8-hour time zone away. We spoke every Sunday. My morning, her evening. We talked about groceries, her garden, the neighbor's dog. We never talked about the things that mattered. They sat between us in every call, like furniture in a room neither of us was brave enough to enter. I hadn't hugged her in 14 months. 14 months. I had reports with shorter revision cycles. Now, I told you the paramedics found nothing wrong with me. What I haven't told you yet is where I went during those 25 minutes. Because I wasn't unconscious. I was somewhere. Somewhere 5,000 miles of ocean should have made impossible to reach. The conference room didn't fade. It was removed. The table, the screen, the 9 faces, the 14th floor, the city. All of it pulled away in a single instant, like a tablecloth yanked off a table. And what was underneath was not darkness. It was not silence. It was the most concentrated presence I have ever encountered. Something so vast, so saturated with reality, that everything I had called real for 43 years suddenly felt like a rough draft. Time did not slow down. Time became irrelevant. The way a fish doesn't think about water, that's how time stopped mattering. I had no body to track it with, no heartbeat to measure it against, no schedule, no deadline. No Tuesday, just an immense, borderless stillness that held me the way the ocean holds a drop of water, completely, without effort, without seam. And in that stillness, I was given something. Not a dream, not a hallucination, a concentrated burst of knowledge delivered directly into the center of who I am, bypassing every filter I had ever constructed. Every spreadsheet, every risk assessment, every carefully maintained wall. A window torn open onto something that hasn't happened yet, but will. And the first thing I saw through that window wasn't a place. It was a person. and she was climbing stairs made of light, right beside me. I was standing on a staircase, not a staircase like any I'd ever seen. Each step was translucent, made of something that looked like solidified morning light, if morning light had weight and structure. And it spiraled upward without visible support, without walls, without a ceiling, curving through a space that was neither indoors nor outdoors, but something architecture has no word for. The air, if you can call it air, carried a warmth that wasn't temperature. It was emotional, like walking into a room where someone you love has been waiting for you, and the waiting itself has filled the space with tenderness. And next to me, one step ahead, climbing with the slow certainty of someone who knows exactly where she is going, was my mother. Not my mother as I'd last seen her, tired, thinning, diminished by months of something she'd been hiding from me across those Sunday phone calls. This was her at her fullest. Not young, exactly. Not the 20-year-old in the photographs. Something better than young. Restored. As if every year of worry, every sleepless night, every burden she had carried for 6 decades had been lifted off her in a single motion, and what remained was the purest version of who she had always been. Her skin was luminous. Her eyes held a clarity I had never seen, not even in my earliest childhood memories. And she was smiling. Not the polite smile of our Sunday calls, a smile so complete it seemed to rearrange the space around it. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Between us, in the silence of that staircase, I felt a communication so total that language would have been a reduction. Everything she had never said, every worry about me living alone in a foreign country, every pride she swallowed because she didn't want to seem sentimental, every "I love you" that got replaced by "Did you eat today?" All of it arrived at once, like opening a file that contained an entire lifetime of unsent messages. And then the staircase opened, and I saw what was waiting at the top. The earth. But not the exhausted, overworked earth I knew. A version so vivid, so renewed, so precisely beautiful that my mind, trained for decades to process data, simply surrendered to it. The colors were not brighter. They were truer. As if every color I had ever seen in my life had been a faded photocopy of this original. Green that pulsed, as though the grass itself had a heartbeat. A sky that shifted between shades of gold and deep violet in a rhythm that felt like breathing. And everywhere, people. Opening their eyes for the first time, rising from the ground as though waking from the deepest sleep imaginable. And on their faces, every single face, an expression I can only describe as the shock of being whole. Bodies that had been broken, bent, worn down by decades of illness or age, rebuilt, restored to a vitality that radiated from the inside out, as if youth weren't an age but a condition of completeness. They looked to be in the prime of life, every one of them, strong, radiant, stunned by their own intactness. And they were running toward each other, not walking, running, with the abandon of people who have been separated for so long that the body can no longer contain the joy of proximity. Parents reaching for children they had released too soon. Grandparents wrapping their arms around faces they hadn't touched in decades. But to them, the gap felt like nothing, like the space between one heartbeat and the next. Because that's what it was. They had closed their eyes in pain, in hospitals, in beds, and the very next conscious sensation was this. No interval, no waiting room, no lonely in-between. Just the deep, dreamless, merciful pause. And then, morning. The animals, not running to anyone in particular, and I need to be precise about this because precision is the only language I trust. They were running among everyone, dogs of every kind, bounding through the crowds with a delirium of happiness, pressing their heads into any hand that reached down. Horses galloping across the open meadows with a freedom that made my chest ache. Cats weaving between the legs of people who laughed and bent down to stroke them. Birds landing on shoulders, on outstretched palms, on the heads of children who shrieked with delight. It wasn't ownership. It was harmony. Every creature moving through that landscape as if the concept of fear had been permanently deleted from their biology. A world where nothing hunted, nothing fled, nothing flinched. Just life. Abundant, unafraid, woven together so tightly that separating the joy of the animals from the joy of the people would have been like trying to separate the warmth from the sun. And there, in the middle of it all, I saw mothers, kneeling on that impossible grass, holding infants they had never held, babies lost too early, to illness, to accident, to the cruelty of a body that couldn't carry them to term. And here they were, real, solid, breathing, gazing up with eyes that had never opened before this moment. And the mothers were weeping. Not from grief, from the overwhelming, disorienting relief of finally holding what they had only ever held in prayer. And in the center of this, in the absolute epicenter of the restoration, I felt something I am still trying to find words for. A presence. Not a person, not a figure. A frequency. A living awareness so vast that the entire scene, the earth, the reunions, the animals, the children, the light, existed inside it, the way notes exist inside a symphony. It was the source, the architect, the reason any of this was happening at all. And I understood, with a certainty that went deeper than data, deeper than proof, deeper than anything my 20 years of risk assessment had ever produced. This was not a metaphor. This was a preview, a compressed glimpse of a future event, sealed into the core of me like a watermark pressed into paper before the ink is even laid. And then the vision turned its lens on me, because standing on that staircase, watching all of this unfold, watching the reunions, the restoration, the overwhelming generosity of a future designed with this much care, I was confronted with the shape of my own life. And the contrast was brutal. I was the woman who had moved 5,000 miles from her mother and called it ambition. I was the woman who had a direct line to the person who loved her most in the world and used it to discuss the weather. I was the operations director who managed billion-dollar portfolios with meticulous attention and managed her most important relationship with leftover minutes on a Sunday morning. And it wasn't that someone accused me of this. Nobody pointed a finger. Nobody read a list of failures. It was worse than that. I simply saw it. The way you see a stain on a white shirt only after someone turns on a brighter light. Every skipped call. Every visit I postponed because the quarter was too busy. Every time my mother said, "I'm fine," and I chose to believe her because believing her was easier than booking a flight. And then, not from outside, not from a voice, but from that same frequency that held everything together, a thought arrived that was not my own. You measured everything except the one thing that mattered. No anger. No punishment, just the quiet, surgical accuracy of a truth that cannot be argued with because it isn't arguing. It's simply describing what is. I had spent 20 years optimizing systems, minimizing risk, maximizing output, and in the process, I had treated the people I loved as though they were renewable resources. Always available, always patient, always there when I finally had a gap in my schedule. I had made efficiency my god and called it responsibility. And the vision showed me, gently, the way you show a child something they're old enough to understand, that the only investment that compounds across the boundary of death is love. Not the abstract greeting card kind, the kind that costs you something, the kind that gets on a plane, the kind that says the words you're afraid to say because saying them means admitting you need someone. That was the preparation I had skipped entirely. Not rituals, not doctrines, not membership in the right institution. The daily, stumbling, imperfect act of reaching for the one who designed all of this, and for the people he placed in my path, with the same seriousness I gave to a quarterly report. And then the staircase began to dissolve. My mother turned to me one final time. That smile, still there, still complete. And without words, without sound, she communicated something that I carry in my chest like a second heartbeat. I am resting. The pain is finished. And the next thing I will know is that morning. And then she was gone. And then the light was gone. And then the ground. The luminous, impossible ground folded in on itself. And I was pulled backward with a violence that felt like being torn from a warm bed and thrown into freezing water. I gasped. The fluorescent lights hit me like ice water. The conference room materialized around me. The table, the screen, the carpet against my cheek. I was on the floor. Someone had loosened my collar. Faces above me, mouths moving, sounds returning in layers like a radio slowly finding its frequency. The smell of carpet cleaner, the hum of the air conditioning, the unbearable heaviness of a body that, seconds ago, I hadn't needed. I wanted to go back. That's the part nobody tells you about. The violence of the return is not the pain. It's the wanting. I had been standing on a staircase beside my mother in the most luminous place I had ever seen. And now I was lying on office carpet under fluorescent tubes, and the distance between those two realities was the cruelest thing I had ever felt. But I was back. And I was back for a reason. I didn't know what the reason was yet, but I could feel it sitting in my chest like an unopened letter, waiting. 40 minutes later, my phone rang. My brother's voice, fractured, barely holding itself together. He didn't need to say the words. Something in me already knew, but he said them anyway. Mum's gone. She passed about an hour ago. They said it was peaceful. She just stopped breathing. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I asked a question that made my brother go silent for a very long time. What time? He checked with the hospital. The answer came back. The exact minute my throat had closed in that conference room, the precise minute I had stopped breathing on the 14th floor, 5,000 miles away, was the minute her heart had stopped. Not approximately, not around the same time, the same minute. And I understood, with a finality that no spreadsheet will ever capture. Love is not limited by distance. It is not weakened by oceans. It operates on a frequency that geography cannot interrupt. And when someone you are bonded to at the deepest level crosses the threshold, that frequency reaches you. Instantly. Without delay. Without permission. Without caring whether you believe in it or not. It found me on the 14th floor of a building in a city she had never visited. It pulled me out of a meeting, out of my body, out of every wall I had spent 20 years constructing. And it carried me to a staircase made of light so I could climb it beside her one last time. I'm speaking to you directly now. I don't care what brought you to this video. Grief, curiosity, a sleepless night, a name you can't stop whispering in the dark. If you have lost someone, if there is a person whose absence has rearranged the furniture of your entire life, I need you to hear this from a woman who spent 2 decades trusting nothing she couldn't verify. They are not suffering. They are not floating in some vague elsewhere, wondering if you've moved on. They are resting, a sleep so absolute, so merciful, that a million years would register as less than a pause between breaths. No pain, no loneliness, no consciousness of the gap. And the very next thing they will experience, the very next sensation after that final exhale, is that morning. The earth remade, the body rebuilt. Eyes opening with a clarity they never had before, and the arms of the people they loved most reaching for them across a field where separation is no longer a concept. For them, the distance between the hospital bed and that morning is nothing. A space thinner than a closed eyelid, a rest without duration. I flew home. I buried my mother, and I stood at her grave. And I didn't feel the bottomless despair I had expected, because I had already said goodbye on a staircase she could not have known about, in a place neither of us should have been able to reach. What I carry with me now, what that compressed vision branded onto the deepest part of me, is this. The most consequential thing you can do with the years you have left is to seek the one who built that future. Not through a formula, not by performing the correct rituals or wearing the right label. Through the raw, daily, sometimes clumsy act of genuinely wanting to know the Creator. And living as though that knowledge changes how you treat the person sitting across the table from you. The person on the other end of the phone call. The person you keep meaning to visit but haven't because the quarter is too busy. Don't wait for a staircase to teach you what a phone call could have. That morning is coming. The reunion is real. And when it arrives, the only thing that will matter is whether you spent your time here reaching for what is permanent, or measuring what was always going to be temporary. My mother is resting. And when she opens her eyes, I intend to be the kind of daughter worth running toward. Tell me in the comments, who is the person you are aching to hold again on that morning? And what is the one thing you would say to them if you could? I'll read every single word.